There is a car factory on the outskirts of Nanjing that has never sold a car. The building is complete. Modern, enormous, fully tooled, with a paint shop, a body line and stamping presses, all built to turn out one electric SUV called the M-Byte. Pre-production started in October of 2019. The company behind it, Byton, had already taken more than 50,000 reservations. Then the money stopped. A funding round led by FAW collapsed. Foxconn walked away. The Nanjing government's own investment arm pulled out. When reporters got inside the site, the lines were still, and the only person there was a security guard at the gate. And that factory isn't the strange part. The strange part is how ordinary it is. Since 2018, more than 400 companies in China that were building or trying to build electric cars have stopped operating. At the peak, there were over 500 of them. Roughly 100 are still trading today. McKinsey expects fewer than 50 to reach 2030. That is the most violent selection event modern manufacturing has ever run, and it's the actual reason the cars coming out the other side are as good as they are. Most videos about Chinese EVs show you the winners. This one shows you the graveyard, because you cannot understand the winners without it. So let's separate what actually happened from what the headlines made of it, because both are in the mix. The wall nobody could see over. There were 500 of them for a very specific reason. Between roughly 2015 and 2019, China made building an electric car about as easy as any government has ever made building anything. Purchase subsidies, tax exemptions, local production licenses that a provincial official could sign. And underneath it, city and provincial governments competing to land a plant, offering land, cheap loans, and guaranteed orders to almost anybody with a business plan. It was a gold rush where somebody else paid for the pics. The logic behind it was sound. China had already lost the internal combustion race. Germany and Japan had a century of engine patents, machining tolerances, and supplier relationships that money could not buy quickly. An electric motor throws almost all of that away, so Beijing changed the game rather than the players. But that created a problem nobody could solve. With over 500 companies in the field, there was no way to tell from the outside which of them could actually build a car at industrial scale. Not the buyers, not the banks, not the ministries handing out the licenses. A company with a rendering, a press event, and a signed license looked exactly like a company with a working paint shop. America ran this same funnel once. In 1908, there were 253 automobile manufacturers in the United States. By 1929, there were 44. A decade after that, fewer than 12, with General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler taking 90% of every car sold. Nobody in 1908 could tell you which three it would be either. The difference is how the sorting got done, and how fast, how the killing actually worked. If nobody could pick the winners from outside, something else had to do the picking. What did the picking was price. First, the price filter. Li Yanwei, a member of the China Automobile Dealers Association, put a number on it. Between 2023 and 2025, the price war stripped 471 billion yuan out of the industry's revenue, about $69 billion. Average vehicle prices fell 11% in 3 years, from 217,000 yuan down to 194,000 yuan. Think of it as running a hurricane at every roof in a city at once. The roofs still standing afterwards aren't lucky. They were built differently, and now you know which ones. Any company whose cost base couldn't absorb a permanent 11% price cut went underwater and stayed there. Cost engineering stopped being a finance department problem and became the trait you needed to breathe. Second, the integration test. The companies that came through make their own parts. BYD builds its own battery cells. The ones that bought their cells, motors, and control electronics from outside suppliers had a fixed floor under their costs that they could not move, so every price cut came straight out of a margin they didn't have. It's the difference between a restaurant that grows its own vegetables and one that buys them at this morning's price. Only one of them wins a price war. And third, the inheritance. This is the part almost nobody covers. When 400 companies die inside 8 years, they don't evaporate. They leave finished factories, tooled production lines, validated suppliers, and thousands of engineers who now know exactly how a battery pack fails because they watched one fail. All of that gets absorbed by whoever is still standing. Chinese car makers now expand by taking over somebody else's idle plant rather than building a new one. It's buying a fully fitted commercial kitchen from a restaurant that closed last month. You get 10 years of someone else's decisions for the price of the equipment. So the graveyard isn't a side effect of the boom. Every survivor is standing on parts of it. The numbers, honestly. Those three effects are the honest explanation. The number bolted to the front of them is where it gets slippery, and let me be straight with you, because this is where the internet starts inventing things. 400 dead car companies is a true statement doing a lot of work it hasn't earned. Most of those 400 were never building cars at any scale. Some held a production license and a rendering, and nothing else. Some made low-speed vehicles, the four-wheeled things closer to a golf cart than to a sedan. Levdio was one of those, and Levdio is on the casualty list. Only a handful ever reached a real assembly line, and Byton reached a real assembly line, and still never sold a car. So the honest version isn't that 400 Teslas failed, it's that over 500 attempts were made, and most never reached a showroom. What is solid is this. In 2024, 129 separate brands sold a battery electric or plug-in hybrid car in China. AlixPartners, in its 23rd Global Automotive Outlook published on the 25th of June 2026, expects about 15 of those to still be financially viable by 2030, and found that only 3 of 30 makers focused on new energy vehicles turned a full-year profit in 2025. BYD, Xiaomi, and Leapmotor. And then there are the graveyard photographs. You have probably seen them. Fields on the outskirts of Hangzhou with hundreds of electric cars parked in weeds, some sitting long enough that plants are growing out of the boot. Similar lots in Nanning and Chengdu, filling up since 2019. Those pictures get posted as proof that Chinese factories built cars nobody wanted. Journalists who actually went and walked the lots found something else. Most of those cars are ride-hailing and fleet vehicles whose operators went under, many of them Chang'an cars run by app fleets like Didi Chuxing that stopped making sense financially. The lots are real, they are mostly a taxi graveyard, not a showroom graveyard, and that distinction matters. The names, numbers that size stay abstract until you put names on them. Singulato, iWays, Byton, Levdio, all shut. WM Motor, once one of the best-funded startups in the country, went under in 2023 after it couldn't raise fresh capital. HiFi built a genuinely striking luxury electric car and halted production in 2024 when its debts overwhelmed its assets. GUA is the strangest one on the list. It was a joint venture between Baidu and Geely, two of the largest companies in China, which is about as much institutional backing as a car startup can get. It cut staff, it restructured. By December, its own employees were publicly demanding to be paid. It has never formally been declared dead. Its stores are shut, and its driver assistance features may simply stop working over time, because features like that need a manufacturer behind them. It's a phone whose maker switched off the update servers, except this one weighs 2 tons and you drive your family in it. And then Neta, its parent company, Hosen New Energy, entered bankruptcy proceedings in June of 2025, with debts close to 10 billion yuan, about $1.39 billion. Hold on to Neta, because Neta had already sold a lot of cars to real people outside China, and that's the part of this story with actual people in it. What a car actually earns. Those names tell you who lost. The margins tell you why almost everybody else is still losing. From January to November of 2025, the gross profit on the average vehicle built in China was 14,000 yuan, about $2,000, and gross means before you pay a single engineer, before advertising, before the dealer, before the debt. For scale, the average new car sold in the United States in June of 2026 went for $49,758. The entire gross margin on a Chinese-built car was roughly what a decent laptop costs. Industry-wide, the 2025 profit margin came in at 4.1%, a record low. Then the first quarter of 2026 arrived, and industry profit fell 18% to 78.4 billion yuan, dragging the margin down to 3.2%. Gross profit per vehicle dropped another 13.2% to 11,000 yuan. By the middle of 2026, the margin on vehicle manufacturing specifically had reached 1.5%. That works out to roughly 1,500 yuan of profit on a car worth 100,000 yuan, about $210. That is a tank of fuel and a set of wiper blades. Around 70% of car sales in China were not making money. As of the third quarter of 2025, 55% of Chinese car dealers were operating at a loss. In February of 2026, Beijing stopped treating this as a market that would fix itself. The State Administration for Market Regulation banned selling a vehicle below its total cost and defined total cost to include administrative, financial, and sales overheads, rather than just what happens on the factory floor. Digital car buying platforms were turned into real-time monitors, required to alert both the regulator and the shopper when a listing looks impossibly cheap. The people running these companies have not been subtle about where this goes. Xi Jinping, who runs Xpeng, said competition in 2026 would be even more brutal and bloody. William Li at NIO sent his staff a memo calling 2026 the final battle. At the Munich Motor Show, BYD's Stella Li told the Financial Times that even 20 OEMs is too much. She meant 20 car makers in total, in a country that at one point had over 500 attempts running at once. Where the surplus goes, a market that loses money on 7 out of every 10 cars has exactly one escape route, and China took it faster than anybody outside was ready for. In 2025, China exported 3.43 million new energy vehicles. That was up 70% year-on-year, against 16% growth the year before. Those cars made up 41% of a total 8.32 million vehicles exported, which makes China the largest vehicle exporter on the planet by a wide margin. The biggest destinations were Mexico, Russia, and the United Arab Emirates. The reason is arithmetic, not ambition. An exported car carries roughly 6 times the margin of a domestic sale. It is a fire escape, and everybody is on the stairs at once. Meanwhile, the home market is doing something people keep reading backwards. In June of 2026, passenger vehicle retail in China was 1.651 million units, down 21% on a year earlier. Across the first half of the year, 8.75 million, down 20%. New energy vehicle retail was 4.734 million, down 13%. And in that same June, new energy vehicles hit 62.8% of the Chinese market, a record, and above 60% for the third month running. That is not a boom. That is the petrol half of the market collapsing faster than the electric half. Your slice got bigger because the cake got smaller. Underneath all of it sits the capacity. China can build about 55.5 million vehicles a year. In 2025, it built 34.78 million. More than half the country's car-making capacity is idle, in an industry where 80% utilization is considered healthy. By May of 2026, exports had passed 4 million units, up 63%, and the year was tracking toward nearly 10 million. The honest reckoning. So here is the part that matters, which is everything those export numbers don't fix. And it's a longer list than the coverage admits. First, the overcapacity nobody wants to switch off. This is the big one. Half of 55.5 million units of capacity is sitting there doing nothing, and idle capacity is normally something you close, but local governments put the land, the loans, and the jobs into those plants, and closing one means unemployment in a specific city with a specific mayor. So Beijing is doing something stranger. It has set annual production floors for individual automakers and blacklists, the ones that miss them, barring them from launching new models. And it quietly removed new energy vehicles from the Strategic Emerging Industries list for the 2026 to 2030 5-year plan. That is a state preparing to let more of these companies go. Second, the walls, and they are going up in several places at once. Brazil is the clearest case. From July of 2026, every imported electric and hybrid vehicle faces a 35% tariff there, the highest South American trade rules allow, and the exemption that let Chinese assembly kits in cheaply expired on the 30th of June. In Europe, extra duties of between 7.8% and 35.3% have sat on top of the standard 10% since 2024, and on the 12th of January 2026, the European Commission published guidance to replace them with minimum import prices set model by model. In the United States, the stack is past 100%. The fire escape has a ceiling, and the ceiling is coming down. Third, the owners left holding the car. Come back to Neta. There are over 25,000 Neta owners in Thailand. Showrooms there fell from 60 to 40. Owners have waited as long as 10 months on a repair or an insurance claim because the parts weren't arriving. The Neta V2 was cut from 549,000 baht to 299,000 baht and sold with no warranty at all. Hozon said in early June that the restructuring would not affect Thailand and that parts supply and software updates would continue as usual. This is not a Chinese problem, and that's worth saying plainly. When Fisker filed for Chapter 11 in June of 2024, roughly 11,000 Ocean owners in the United States were left with cars that had cost between $40,000 and $70,000 and were losing the software that ran them. No updates, no connected services, no warranty. About 4,000 of those owners organized, reverse-engineered the car's own software, and kept the fleet running themselves. Canoo went the same way. A modern car depends on its manufacturer more than any car in history, and that is true wherever it was assembled. And fourth, the arithmetic. Around 70% of sales lose money, manufacturing margin of 1.5%, roughly $210 of profit on a car. The cars themselves are genuinely good, and none of the specs in them are fake. What isn't settled is whether a system running at 1.5% can keep building them at that standard once the state stops absorbing the difference. So step back and look at the whole thing. A finished factory outside Nanjing with 50,000 reservations and no cars. Over 500 companies at the peak, more than 400 gone, roughly 100 left. A price war that pulled $69 billion out of the industry and filtered relentlessly for one trait, which was cost. Survivors who build their own cells and inherited everyone else's tooling, gross profit of $2,000 on a car, then 210.343 million vehicles pushed overseas into tariff walls that keep rising, and 25,000 people in Thailand holding a perfectly good car built by a company that no longer exists. America ran this exact funnel, 253 manufacturers in 1908, 44 by 1929, fewer than 12 a decade later, with 90% of the market in 3 pairs of hands. It took the United States 30 years and the Great Depression to get there. China did it in 8 years and a price war. The cars are the receipt. Videos like this take a long time to research, so if you want the rest of it, subscribe, because the 100 companies still standing are not finished sorting themselves out either.